Hi everyone in Research Methods. We are covering Chapter 7 today in the reading packet. It's a few different topics and several pages, but I promise I'll try to be brief and to the point to not make it any more confusing than it needs to be. So let's get started. Collecting data, sampling, and sampling error. We kind of mesh all three of these topics together. So this is not only important for your next test, but it applies to your paper as well. In fact, that's the whole idea of how the class and the lab kind of work together so that you learn the skills necessary to write your paper. So, first of all, you want to give surveys to people. That can be done online, in person, by email, or whatever means necessary. The goal is to be able to generalize your results to the outside world. Even if your paper is about something very specific, like Native American adolescents with multiple personality disorder. By the way, that's now called dissociative identity disorder as well. But that's not as relevant as what we're talking about here, and that is generalizing. Does this apply to other people or only to the people that I am speaking of? Does it apply to the outside world or only to the exact people who took my survey? You hope that your survey and the results you get do generalize to a greater group of people than just the ones who you surveyed. Now, if you narrow it down to a very specific group of people, you have control. That means you've controlled who exactly is in your study. You've decided that you only want it to be a certain group of people, Native Americans, females, people over the age of 65, or whatever. You have control. However, that kind of goes against generalizing, because the more control that I have, the less I can generalize it to the outside world. If I have a great deal of control, it only applies to a specific group of people. But if I let people fill out my survey who were just humans, just college students, just adults, I can generalize that more to an outside group of people. Hopefully that makes sense. Now, the more control you have over your study, the less error you have, sampling error. In other words, if I can control that I want just a certain type of person, it has to be a full-time college student living in Arizona, well, I have a lot of control, and I probably don't have quite as much sampling error, where I get the wrong type of people in my study that might mess up the results. This applies to you, and it applies to the paper that you're writing. How many surveys do I need? There is no answer. Don't you hate when that happens? There's no exact answer. But here's something to know. 12 in each group is a nice number. So what do we mean by that? Well, if you're doing males versus females, quick math would tell you that would be 24. That should be your goal, no less than that. If you're doing 3 different races or ethnicities of people, well, that would be 36, wouldn't it? So 12 is a minimum for a goal. However, what would be too many? Well, keep in mind you're going to be scoring everybody's survey and adding them up. I certainly wouldn't want the number to be in the hundreds. Then you're going to be entering the data. That takes a while too. So usually if you have 30 in each group, whatever your groups are, that is plenty for a class like this. Try not to have less than 12 if you can help it. Types of sampling. Descriptive and inferential. Descriptive, we've talked about this I think in an earlier chapter, comes from the word describe. I am describing people in my survey as 3/4 female, or 50% Caucasian, or whatever, describing. But infer, that goes back to the term we just covered, generalization. If I found that most of the people who take my survey prefer to drink coffee in the morning. Does that mean that most people in the world drink coffee in the morning? I don't know. I want to infer my results, inferential, to a general group of people. Random selection and random assignment. This is a slightly different topic than we just covered, but it still relates. Selecting people at random, where each person has an equal chance of being picked. Random selection. So how does that work exactly? Well, if Chandler Gilbert Community College has 11,000 students, I want every person to have an equal chance of being picked. That's an awfully difficult thing to do. It can be accomplished, but it's not easy. If you just showed up on campus, well, what if there's no classes that day or people are taking online? And maybe you're there during the day and some people are only there at nights or on weekends. You want to select people at random if you can, but that's not always easy. Just calling people on the phone? Well, if you're like me, you don't answer your phone unless you know who it is calling you. It's hard to be totally random. Picking people at random. What's a little easier to do is random assignment. What if your group is already there in front of you? They are a captive audience. A classroom full of kids, a hospital full of patients, well, then you might be able to randomly, not give them a choice, you do it at random to reduce error, assign them to have something happen. Maybe half of them get the real medicine and half get the placebo, or maybe half get counseling and the other half don't get any treatment. You randomly assign them if they are already what we call a captive audience, they are there already, and then you can make something happen to them. That would be an experiment using random assignment. Now, here's some examples here of how you could do either or both or neither. So you can read through those paragraphs and see. Last thing here, random assignment. No, let's start with selection. We'll go in order here. Random selection is related to external validity. So what do we mean by that? That's a concept, external validity, we're going to cover several weeks from now. But for now, let's try to keep it simple. Random selection. If every person in my population has an equal chance of being picked, then it relates to external validity, because hopefully I have a representation of people that are similar to whatever the population is. So college students are quite diverse, but honestly, they're usually rather young as far as adults go. We do get some older adults, but typically it's people in their late teens to mid-20s. So if that's my population and I randomly select people, is that true of all college students, the ones I found at Chandler Gilbert? Maybe or maybe not. I want to be able to generalize my results to the outside world. So that has to do with external validity, the external world. Random assignment. If my people are already part of a group, like the examples I just gave, patients at a hospital or kids at a school, well, what I hope to have is internal validity. I'm randomly assigning them to have something happen. Maybe the kids learn the new math program or the old math program. I hope I didn't make any mistakes in my study that would make it biased or invalid. That would be internal validity. Internal validity means nothing in the process of your study was problematic. By the way, we're going to talk about some issues related to that in a chapter that's coming up soon. So, next thing, we talked about this in one of the first chapters, populations and samples. Remember, population is everyone in your group. Some people say, oh, my population is all college students and my sample is all honor students. No, you just said two populations, a bigger one and a smaller one. Well, here we try to make that clear that a sample is a random group of the population. You get them at random one way or another, but it's not always that simple, as you will see here. Let's scroll down a little bit. Random, stratified, and matched. So the simplest one is, where is it? Random. There it is. I just pick people at random to be in my study. This is awfully difficult to do. If you're trying to predict who's going to win a political election and you want to contact 1,000 voters and say, who are you voting for? Don't you think some people don't respond to their email or answer their phone, or you confront them at a grocery store and maybe they don't want to talk to you or tell you the truth? It's hard to do things at random, but that's a good thing to try to do. There's nothing wrong with trying to be random. So here's an example of a deck of cards. Doesn't one card have a 1 in 52 chance of being picked? If you're randomly picking one card out of the 52 card deck, that's randomness. That's approximately a 2% probability of being picked. So, random. That's the easiest one. Stratified gets a little more complicated. What if I want my sample to look like the population? So, perhaps in college, 5% of students are honor students, 95% are not. So what do I want to do? Well, when I take my survey, I want to make sure that only 5% of them are honor students. Maybe I learned that 2% of students have a physical disability, and I want to know if it's hard to get around campus as needed. Well, maybe I want my sample to have 2% people with disabilities on the college campus. I might want my sample to look just like my population. That's stratified. By the way, we just talked about political elections. They try to do this. If you know that a given town has 40% Republicans, as an example, then maybe I want my sample to represent that as well, so that my sample is stratified to my population. Moving right along, match samples. What does that mean? There might be a different kind of study where it's important to me to have an equal number of males and females, an equal number of high income and low income people, or perhaps an equal number of people with a college degree or not a college degree. So if that's important to your study, then you make sure you have an equal number in each group. If you're doing something on dating or marriage, maybe it is important that you get an equal number of males and females, or people who are currently married versus unmarried. That means that you are matching them. So, we are going to talk about this in a little bit, extraneous variables, in a future chapter, a variable that is not being manipulated or changed. However, it does become part of your study. For example, perhaps gender or IQ level or job experience, or whether you're a single parent, you might be worried about having too many of one group or another in your study. That might be the reason why you match people. That could very well be. Okay, well, that is it for this section, section 7. We are going to be going a little bit out of order here, however, so the next section that you will see a video of will be section 9. Take care.